La Cámara Peruana del Libro presenta la 22ª edición de la Feria Internacional del Libro de Lima, FIL LIMA 2017.
Scenarios, you always seems to be attached to the real experience. So I think that's fascinating, the invention of something that it's not extraordinary or different or supernatural, but it seems to be like your daily life, but it has something different. You're putting life, you're inventing this kind of spontaneous experience. So I think that's very Chekhovian in your work.
Well, it's the pledge of literature, which is to say, if you read my story, I will make you think that life is important. I will make you think that life is in fact worth living, and maybe you didn't think that. Maybe you thought that life was a bore, or maybe you thought that you were going through life on autopilot, or maybe you were just not paying attention to the things you should be paying attention to make life seem vivid. And again, I'm happy for us to be talking about Chekhov because Carver and I didn't invent this. We're just doing something that we saw other people do and thought to ourselves, well, this is something that can actually continue to be done as long as human beings are alive on the earth.
I remember this Chekhov story about a man who discovers that his wife is sleeping with somebody else and then goes to a store where they sell weapons, and he wants to buy a gun to kill, but there's a line. There's a line that he has to wait to buy the weapon. So while he's waiting, he thinks, well, who am I going to kill? I'm going to kill my wife. No, because that would be my children with no mother. So I'll kill her lover. No, why would I go to jail because of this son of a bitch, her lover? Well, I'll then kill myself. Well, why should I? Why should I die if they're doing this? And when it's finally his turn and he has to ask for a weapon, he says, well, I want a little stick to just chase away the birds. That's how he ends up buying. No? So, this reminds me how, for you, humor is also very important. Yeah. And there's a phrase of yours that says that if it's not funny, it's not serious.
That's right. That's right. But you know, when you're telling that story of Chekhov's, what I think when I'm hearing you tell that story is how much that story is a piece of artifice. Because probably, in fact, if a person were standing in line to buy a gun, so he was going to take that gun and go kill his wife or kill his lover or kill himself, probably one of those things would happen in real life, but it's the artifice of the story and the possibility that the story gives to the writer that I can do the implausible thing here. I can make the story be a little laboratory for all of the things that I would like the story to address. Whereas in real life, probably the story would address none of those things, or only one or two of those things. So it's very much like what you asked me before when you said, well, when you ask somebody, what is the most important thing in the world to you? Writers are always trying to say, how can I make this story important? What can I do in this story's range of possibility that it can mount to the reader's level of consequence?
And as what the sports writer says, sports writing teaches you that there are no transcendent subjects. So.
That's right. Yeah, they're only these subjects. They're only somebody waiting in line to buy a gun, trying to decide who he's going to kill with it. Yeah. Those are as large as the subjects get, and then through the agency of art, those rather mundane, plausible events can rise to the level of moral consequence, ethical consequence at the same time. I mean, you ask about humor. For me, making things funny is just one of the ways that I try to make the books interesting to write. I try to please myself. If I'm writing something that it makes me laugh, I think, well, this is probably worth reading. I mean, how many of us can make someone laugh? I mean, I think that's just a great challenge to be able to do. And it is also my conviction that those things, as you said, Alonso, that things that are funny are innately related to things that are serious. Right. And things that are serious are innately related to things that are funny. I mean, you see it in Shakespeare all the time. Shakespeare understood this to his core. So Cervantes, well, yes, indeed, Cervantes. Yeah, absolutely. Borges understood that wonderfully well. Yeah. So, I mean, my fault. I'm always thinking about, when I have a conversation like this, I'm always thinking about my flaws, what my faults are, because they seem to come rising into my brain when I'm talking about literature, what my shortcomings are. And I know that my shortcoming as a novelist is that I'm too serious about things. And when I want to write about something that I think is terribly serious about life and death, I grow morose. And I somehow fail or leave behind the things that I think are important, which is to say the humorous part of those things that are morose. I mean, Kafka knew this probably better than anybody in the 20th century. Joyce knew it. Beckett knew it.
At the same time, if humor doesn't happen in a spontaneous way, it can be dreadful. No, when somebody's trying to be funny on purpose, and in an artificial way, that can be a terrible effect in literature.
Well, it's a terrible risk to try to be funny. You know, I'm dying up here. Isn't that the expression?
Richard, and what's your take on creative writing in universities? This kind of now you can study in many American universities creative writing. You have taught writing, and what's your take? Is it useful for a writer to learn in a university the trade, or is it much more important to live as a writer? What's your take on this? Because there's a lot of talk in America about the campus novel, for example. No, those writers who are in a kind of a bubble, always writing and reading and so on, and they are maybe missing some experiences of life which are very important to their characters.
Well, I think a lot of things about it. I mean, first of all, I think being a student in a university when you're learning to write is a victimless crime. That it's just something that you're doing to try to make yourself better. And I mean, maybe Americans are more habitually believing that we can learn something rather than that we are born with something. But I mean, you're talking about writing programs in America producing books that aren't very good. Those books wouldn't have been very good anyway, it seems to me. There's never a shortage of not very good books, no matter what their origin. But I think in a good circumstance, by which I mean if the student can make herself or himself available, that there's no difference in a writing program than in French writers in 1919 living in Montparnasse and showing each other their work. I think that's finally just as conducive to good work as anything else. And if students can only think when they're on college campuses about writing about college campuses, you could write a really good campus novel. Lucky Jim is a wonderful novel about universities. I mean,
Stoner, you read
Stoner, J.P. Donlevy, my God, writing about Trinity College in Dublin. I mean, you can't measure good books by the number of bad books that there are. There just isn't. You can't worry as a novelist about how many bad books there are being written all around you all the time. All you have to worry about is, am I going to be able to write a great book? Someplace, you know, in the hotel where we're staying, there is a young man who's working there. And he's one of these young men who stands in the lobby of the hotel with the little thing in his ear, looking slightly threatening.
like a bodyguard.
Like a bodyguard, but he's a bodyguard for the whole hotel. He's what we used to call the house detective. And as I was walking out, he said to me tonight, I'll give you my word, he said, "Do you ever read Cyril Connolly?"
Really?
I said, well, in fact, I do read Cyril Connolly, and here's this man, he's standing with his suit on and his little nameplate, and he's got this little thing in his ear. In America, he'd have a gun. He's asking me about Cyril Connolly, and I thought to myself, a line of Cyril Connolly's, which he didn't tell me, this young man didn't tell me. Cyril Connolly said, the only true function of a writer is to write a masterpiece. It's one of the great lines in the world because it forgives all sins. It forgives everything. Because what it basically means is, if you write a book and it's not a masterpiece, it doesn't matter. I mean, it might matter to you, but it doesn't matter to the world. So I don't worry about whether or not students are writing crappy campus novels after spending 3 years on the Columbia University campus. It just matters to me if they write a great one, and it's likely that someone will.
One of the things that is, most interesting for me as a reader, and sometimes in these last few days and weeks, I've read out loud some of your work to my wife, to Kristen, and for instance, the beginning of Independence Day, and some other parts, and it's the wonderful music you have in your prose. And I think that's very interesting for you and very important to work with words and to have what you quoted about the poet Seamus, about poetry, no? Poetry is to repose on the stability of a musically satisfying order of the sounds. The stability of a musically satisfying order of the sounds. And for instance, I know that one of your novels, Canada, has that title of Canada because you like the sound of the words Canada, not only because it has to do with the plot, no? So could you tell us more about this work with words, with the music of words, with prose?
Well, you know, I grew up as a young writer in the 60s, reading all kinds of wonderful writers who were not representing reality in the way that I saw it. It was sort of, at the time, called experimental writing. It was Borges. I mean, Borges was writing in the 60s, though he was quite old by then, but Cosmic Comics was Calvino. There was all kinds of things going on in what we thought of as Latin America, in which we were made to understand that writing was not just holding the mirror to life. Writing was not just making books that provided a window so that you could see out and see the world that you could see anyway. That writing was about language, and that language was visible and was audible and had a kind of specific gravity to it, and when we wrote it on the page, we could hear it in our mind's ears, and so that became to me pleasant. I understood that there was a dimension to language that I could both be sensitive to and also manipulate and use, and some of that was the rhythm, how many beats to a line. And I'm not talking about writing rhymed and metered poetry, but just trying to hear the rhythm of the sentence as you read it along, because the reader who's reading it silently will hear that, whether she or he knows it or not. Maybe you, as a reader, you read 1,000 words a minute, and you're only looking for the cognitive sense of the sentence, but you are sensitive to all of those rhythms subliminally, I guarantee you. And it also was true that I am and was dyslexic when I was young. And so I read so slowly that all of those qualities of language which are inherent to it, rhythm and sonority and how words look on the page, were very, very available to me because I was such a slow reader. So I just thought there is this dimension to language which maybe you don't get when you read a legal brief, or maybe you don't get when you read a report from a doctor. But when you're reading it in art, you have that dimension which is possible to work with as a novelist, and it creates pleasure.
Some 80 years ago, I had the pleasure to hear you reading in Banff, in Canada. You read your short story, Quality Time, and before reading it, you said, I'm going to read this story in its entirety, the whole story. So we were prepared to read, to hear something relatively long, no?
It is long.
It is, but it was a fascinating experience because we were really taken by the story, and it was extraordinary to hear the music of the words and so on. Do you read aloud your prose sometimes just to know how the rhythm is going on, or what's your relationship with this oral experience of reading aloud?
Well, I do read everything out loud, often most of the time I read everything out loud to Christina, novels which take 6 weeks to do. But I do it probably mostly so that I can be certain all the words are in the right place. So that because I'm dyslexic, I can lose things. I can leave words out, or I can have a sentence which doesn't mean what I think it means, and read it. And so in order to be certain that I have complete authority over the sentences, I read them out loud. But I have to say, I don't have anything else to do. It's not as though I'm trying to do it while I'm, being a lawyer or being a physician. This is my vocation, so I have nothing else as important to do than that. And along the way toward deciding if all of the sentences are correct as I like them, I inevitably, because I read them slowly, I inevitably hear those rhythms, and I will certainly change a sentence if I hear a beat that's off. Even if the sentence means exactly what I want it to say, if it's got a beat too many, if it's got a beat too few, if a word has 3 syllables when really what I want is 2 syllables, I'll throw that word away and find a word that has 2 syllables, and in the process sometimes change the sense of the sentence. So again, I know I'm making this seem to be difficult. It actually isn't. It actually isn't that difficult at all. It's really no difficult to write than it is to read. I give you my word. I mean, anybody should feel encouraged about writing books when they hear me talk.
Your friends know that you are also not only been a sports writer, but a sports person. Yes. And you had a
failed athlete all my life.
Your grandmother's husband was a boxer. Yeah. You liked boxing.
Yeah.
You hunt.
Yes.
Which appears in some of your stories, the goose hunting. You play squash.
Yes.
No? And you like to watch games. To watch.
Yeah, I do. All those manly things.
Yeah. And also, I read in an interview that for you, writing is somehow a physical exercise. It's like lifting weights. I think I heard that it's something that has to do with muscles and physical fitness.
Well,
in a way.
In the sense of writing sentences with a pencil or with a pen, which is what I mostly do, sitting at a desk all right. day, and at the end of the day, I'm tired. I'm usually physically tired, but if I said it was like lifting weights, I was telling a lie. Lifting weights is fun. I like to lift weights, but writing is sedentary, really, and you have to get up and walk around the room all the time, and you don't just sit at least I don't just sit at my desk for 9 hours a day. I would be a lump if I did. But it is physically testing in a way, but it isn't very physically satisfying for me. That's why I do all the other things, because they are physically satisfying. Writing takes a lot out of you and doesn't put very much back in.
And I read a wonderful definition you gave of Keats as writing something that needed diligent indolence. Yeah. What's beautiful. Yeah. Diligent indolence.
Yeah, and that's pretty much framed by what I just said. Yeah. You are sitting sitting in one place for long periods of time, and at the same time you're very avid. It's invigorating, even though it takes a lot out of you. It's invigorating to do it. I think there's probably very few things in life that are as invigorating as when you feel like you're writing well.
I guess we can take some questions from the floor.
Yes, we have a few minutes. If anybody wants to ask a question to Richard about any subject, no? Almost any subject.
¿Alguna pregunta para Richard Ford?
I can see you. There's a gentleman.
Sí.
Please. Yes, sir.
¿Les van a dar un micrófono o no? Ah, te lo doy.
Buenas noches, Richard Ford, y a los panelistas. Soy Dagoberto Fonseca. Quería
Por favor, si
preguntarle...
pueden decir su nombre antes de...
Sí,
de-
soy Dagoberto Fonseca.
Muy bien.
Mi nombre es Dagoberto Fonseca. Quería preguntarle al señor Richard Ford si podría ampliarnos la anécdota de que cómo nació la historia de Canadá, si es verdad lo que se lee en internet de que estuvieron cazando en Canadá con Raymond Carver, su amigo, y ahí nació parte de la historia, ¿no? Y si podría ampliar la anécdota. Gracias.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I had never been to Saskatchewan before, and this must have been about 1985 or 84. And Ray called me up and he said a university in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan had asked him to come up and give a lecture. And that they had promised him, if he would come, that they would take him goose hunting. And he said to me, he said, "Do you want to go with me?" I said, "I would like nothing better than to go with you." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do." He said, I'll take half the money that they're going to give me, and I'll give it to you, and you can buy your plane ticket up there, and we'll go goose hunting together. And so I thought that was a great idea, and I did that. But then when we were up there, I don't know if you could picture Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan has no trees, wheat fields, enormous wheat fields that stretch for 1,000 miles, and thousands of geese in the air. And so we shot some geese, and after we had shot these geese, we had to have somebody to pluck them, to take the feathers off and to take the guts out. And so we asked where we could do this, and this man said, "Well, you know, if you go down this road, you take this road about 10 miles, you'll come to a little house, and there's a man there who will pluck these geese for you." And so we did. We got in the car, and we drove down this long road where there are no trees, just huge skies. And here's this little house, and we went to the house, and we knocked on the door, and out of this house came this beautiful girl. And she was we called her the goose plucker's daughter. And so she came out of this house, and she had a hatchet in her hand. And she said, "Yes, I'll clean these geese for you." And she took these geese that we had, about 10 of them, and she took them over to a piece of board, and she went whack. She knocked their heads off, and whack, knocked their heads off like that. And we're alarmed, you know. We're thinking to ourselves, "Oh my God, I've never seen anything like this in our lives." And she's ripping these geese apart. She's a beautiful girl. And so she ultimately cleaned the geese, and she gave them to us, and we paid her, and she went back in her house, and we left. And Carver and I said, we're going to make a bet on who is the first person to get this girl into a story. And I won the bet, because I was the first person to get her into the story. That's basically that's the first time I ever went to Saskatchewan, and it was the beginning of my life writing about Canada. Yeah. Thank you.
Muy buenas noches. Realmente estoy impresionada, ¿no?, por toda esa su experiencia, su vasta experiencia. Pero al inicio usted se refirió justamente a la ética. Difícil en este momento comprenderla, ¿no? ¿Cuál, dentro de toda su vasta experiencia, de qué manera o cómo haríamos el enfoque en el momento actual a la nueva generación, sobre todo a los maestros que están en contacto con los niños y asimismo, lo primero, a los padres de familia, esa su experiencia de la ética en cuanto a la formación para los niños y niñas, y cuál sería el valor más importante y trascendente que se necesita en el mundo actual? Muchísimas gracias.
Well, it should be said that I don't have children. Christina and I don't have children. So I'm, in some ways, an amateur. I would be less than an amateur in telling anybody for 1 minute about raising children. I like to write about children, but I would be no good at raising children. I'm certain about that. But I mean, it's probably worthwhile to say what ethics, what the study and the practice of ethics is, as opposed to morality. I mean, morality is the practice and study of what is good and what is bad. And ethics is the practice and the study of what one ought to do and what one ought not to do. And in those different ethical, philosophical frameworks, there's a lot of overlapping, obviously. But I mean, I think were I a parent, I would think to myself that it is my obligation to tell my child what a child should and should not do, how a child should and should not behave, what are the consequences of his or her actions based on his or his own impulses. In other words, to think, how is what I do going to affect not only myself but the lives of others, so that my behavior does not adversely affect the lives of others. And in making those kinds of assessments, to be very scrupulous and to be very imaginative, because that's exactly what writers do. When we try to imagine the consequence of the behavior of any character that we write about, we're trying to imagine as much as we possibly can what are the whole range of possibilities of consequence. And I think just as we practice it as writers, all the three of us, that's exactly what is the proper role of a parent in raising a child, to try to imagine the consequence of your behavior.
Muy bien, ¿hay tiempo para una pregunta más, Sally?
Well, good evening, Mr. Ford. I would like to know your comments regarding the Nobel Prize that was given to Bob Dylan last year, right? I would like to know your comments about it.
I didn't hear that.
About Bob Dylan.
The Nobel Prize, is that the Nobel Prize
yeah.
that was given to Dylan last year, Bob Dylan?
Well, I'm not Swedish, and it's not my prize. And I thought Bob Dylan is a wonderful writer of songs, and whose work has made vast differences in the lives of vast millions of people. So when the Swedish Academy decided that Bob Dylan was a writer and Bob Dylan was a poet, and that they would give him that award, I thought to myself, good on you. Fine with me. Would I have done it? I don't know. Nobody asked me. You know, you can get in trouble trying to be constantly having an opinion about every single thing that everybody else does in the world. And so I thought to myself, well, the Nobel Prize is a great prize. I didn't think he was undeserving. Did I think that there might have been somebody who was more deserving? Possibly. And that maybe that person will come along later. They give one every year. And so my attitude is do no harm. And I didn't think they did any harm. And I know that's not necessarily a popular opinion. I know people who get up in arms about it. I think to myself, think about something else.
Agradecemos a Richard Ford, a Juan Villoro y a Alonso Cueto, a la Cámara Peruana del Libro y a la Embajada de Estados Unidos por esta presentación, y al público por su asistencia, y los invitamos a recorrer la feria en todos sus stands, y también se les invita al gran estelar, que es a las 9:30 de la noche, en este mismo auditorio, donde se presenta Claudia Arellano, La Noche de México, quinteto de Claudia Arellano. Muchas gracias.
So may I just say thank you to my colleagues, please, and thanks to the book fair for letting me come at all. It's a great, great honor, a pleasure. Thank you.